Hi, my name is Kathy Hart. I'm a GP at Affinity Care. As part of our celebrations for LGBT History Month, we had an evening called My LGBT Heroes. On the panel was Alistair talking about RuPaul Charles, Moudy talking about Alan Turing, Jude was talking about John Beckett, and Rick was talking about his first boyfriend, Paul. As part of the audience, we had Matt, Sarah, Nicole, Laura, Maryam, Lorraine and Vicky, and you will hear those voices as we go through the recording. I found it a really interesting conversation because we looked at how someone can affect us on a personal level all the way through to heroes who can affect us with legal and cultural changes. The ripples of what these people have done for us have affected us through time since the Second World War for Alan Turing, all the way up to the present time with RuPaul and RuPaul's Drag Race on BBC. In the notes for this, I shall put links to an interview with Sue Sanders and Rodney Wilson regarding LGBT History Month origins. I shall put the link to Voices and Visibility, an article regarding Alan Turing and the controversy over his suicide ruling, and also a link to John Beckett and Duncan Lustig-Prien, who was mentioned by Jude. The evening brought up a lot of personal reflections for both our panel and our audience members, and there is some swearing, so please be aware of that. I hope that you find this as illuminating as I did. And please, like Lorraine says at the end of the recording, let's keep this discussion going. Let's keep these conversations going about how we can be more inclusive of our siblings in the LGBT plus community.
Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Everyone knows that I'm Kathy. My preferred pronouns are she, her. I'm a straight cis woman, so I'm perfect for the job of chairing an LGBT plus heroes panel. If we can introduce our panel tonight, and I will start with Alistair.
Hi everyone, I'm Alistair. I identify as male, cisgendered male who is homosexual. I also don't mind the term great pufter. And an also important part of my identity is that I'm also Scouse. And my hero that I'm going to be talking about later in the session is RuPaul Charles.
Wonderful. Next up, Rick, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yep. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name's Rick, and I'm a gay man, and I identify, well, I am a cisgender male, and I prefer the pronouns he, him, unless I'm in my close-knit circle of gay friends, and I don't mind she, her, but that's on a private joke basis. My personal hero tonight is somebody very personal, and it's an ex-partner of mine.
Thank you. Jude.
Hi, I'm Jude. I identify as female, she. The person I'm going to talk about tonight is a guy that I used to work with called John Beckett.
Fantastic. And Moudy?
Hi, my name is Moudy. Cis male pronouns would be he, him, and I am excited to talk to you all about Alan Turing tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming. If that's okay, Alistair, after you.
My LGBT plus hero that I'm going to talk about is RuPaul Charles. For those that don't know who RuPaul Charles is an American man who is a gay, identifies as a gay man, whose primary job is that he is a drag queen. And he was a very kind of emerging drag queen in the late 80s into the early 90s. And he was best known for being the supermodel of the world as a take on some of the famous kind of identified female supermodels of the era. Starting in New York, primarily, but from Georgia, so the deep south, and he is a black man and had a lot of prejudice against him, both growing up as a gay kind of kid and also as a black kid, and kind of took his chance and moved out of Georgia quite early on in his career and moved across to New York. And he is a world famous drag queen now, which is something that in 2021 feels like a really easy phrase to say. But in 5 years ago, even, I would argue that it was probably a bit of a strange statement to make. And RuPaul has a show that was on American TV and then came across onto the UK and Netflix, and started to get quite a close cult following and became almost a very popular thing within young people, and in particular for young queer people, to really try and watch and express and understand queerness. And that's why RuPaul for me is my hero, because he allowed me to tap into some of the queerness that I probably kept into a bit of a box, because going through my career right the way through as a gay man, although I've never particularly hidden my gayness, I'm famous for being the person in Freshers Week at university who introduced himself as, "Hi, I'm Al, and I'm from Liverpool, and I'm gay," and then would like do 4 shots. So, you know, I never hid it overtly, but I was always cautious as my career progressed, because you never know how you're going to be judged. And there's that fear that if you're too open in the workplace, that might be detrimental, you know? And I think for me, when I started to access RuPaul, for me, I remember initially watching it, and I was quite afraid, because I wasn't sure whether I was okay to do this, whether it was right for me to do this, whether it was going to lead to kind of my queerness eking out when I tried to keep it closed in certain circumstances. And I think the biggest thing that RuPaul taught me was, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? And to me, that really allowed me to anchor down and just kind of start to explore in my kind of mid to late 20s who I was, and then who I really wanted to be, and how I wanted to present myself to the world. And I think over the years of watching and watching RuPaul's career develop, really what I see is acceptance across multiple aspects of society. You know, teens and older kids, you know, university kids that you know, perhaps wouldn't have access to this type of thing, it's opened the door. It's inspired other cultural offspin. So I'm a great musical theatre fan. There's been a musical that started, hit the West End and Broadway, called Everybody Loves Jamie, which is about a story about a young kind of teen in Sheffield who wanted to go to prom in their drag persona and wasn't allowed. And essentially it's a musical built around that. Now, those types of young people are inspired by people like RuPaul. And I think if anybody gets a chance to watch Drag Race, it's very scripted, but the stories of the LGBT people that's built within the essence of that program, it's about being who you are and owning who you are, and not apologizing for being who you are, and trying to recognize that, again, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? So my gay icon hero is RuPaul Charles.
Right, thank you ever so much, Alistair. That was incredibly personal, so thank you. What's the difference between a drag queen and being a trans woman?
So the difference between a drag queen and a trans woman in this context is, a drag queen is a man who would identify as a man more often than not, or at least historically so, and I'll get back to that, who is a female impersonator as part of their job, and uses perhaps some of that as well to express their queerness and who they are, and embrace their feminine kind of part of their masculinity. A trans woman is somebody who it was perhaps born male as their kind of gender at birth, but does not identify with that gender anymore. And over the years, RuPaul's Drag Race has embraced that. And this, again, is the sign of the world we're living in. So the current series of RuPaul's Drag Race does have a trans man. So somebody who was assigned female gender at birth, who then transitioned to become a man, who is a female impersonator as their job. So I think that's the main difference between a drag queen and a trans woman.
Thanks, Alistair, for that. And I think I particularly want to thank you that you've made the link between, if we want to say, kind of normalization of drag queens and the link to RuPaul's Drag Race. I've never watched it, but I can say, as somebody who grown up in Bradford, went to school in Halifax, now spends the majority of his time in Leeds, I can say that I can see more people able to kind of naturally express themselves walking around Leeds in drag. And I'm sure at times it must be difficult for them. And I feel like myself, I kind of look at them and then also think, well, I don't want to look at them because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. But then at the same time, I do want to look at them because I would look at anyone else. And I just feel like the more I get to see it, the more normalized it becomes for me. And surely the more normalized it becomes for them to feel like they can walk around and express themselves and feel like they're not being judged. And hopefully more and more people will share that with them. So it was more just that link to RuPaul as being the person who is helping that make the change was nice for me to be able to associate with.
Again, if you're going into a bar and somebody's dragged up, they're probably wanting those stares in some ways. I think if you're walking down the street with someone and you're glancing at them because you think, oh, those shoes are pretty, then I always think, just go for it and say, I think your shoes are amazing, and then carry on walking. Because I think, there's a difference between a judgmental stare that makes somebody feel uncomfortable versus you kind of taking a glance and go, okay, and then making a positive comment. Just saying, if somebody said to me, your coat is amazing, I'd be like, I know, and then carry on walking. And I think, there are elements that it is acceptable, but I think also the things going through perhaps that queer person's mind at the time as you're walking past them is that person going to knife me? So if you give reassurance to that person to be like, your shoes are amazing, then that's a real positive enforcement for everybody in that sphere around them, versus you kind of looking but then looking away is probably less positive.
Can I just hold on to that word that you said about normalizing? If you Google LGBT plus History Month, there's a great conversation between the founders of both the American and the British LGBT plus history, and Sue Sanders, who's the British founder, she still runs it now, but she uses the term usualize rather than normalize, because she says with the term normalize, you're suggesting that there is a normal and that LGBT plus people fall outside of it. And I've used that word as well, normalize, because we want to normalize everything. We want to normalize disability, we want to normalize mental health, we want to normalize loads of things, but actually I like that term of usualize. It's more inclusive for us to begin with, but I agree, anything on that spectrum of normalize to usualize, I think is exactly what we're trying to achieve here.
This is my curiosity, Alistair. So Sancha's in the theatre world, and majority of her friends are gay, and quite a lot of them do drag, and they actually perform. They go and do performance, but some of her friends do that and they don't perform. Is there a difference there? So they'll still do all the makeup and the wigs and the costumes and what they love, but they don't perform.
I think that's a really good question, Lorraine. I think a lot of groups of queer friends, if they're going out for a night out, they may want to use drag as just a way to express like a nice outfit for that evening. And I think what's happening more and more, and what's becoming more, what are you saying, usualized? I think is that, people are expressing themselves more freely. I think there are breakdowns of what's expected for them. I mean, when I was a teenager, we wore Fred Perry shirts that were heavily starched and a long jean. I would have killed to go out in some tight tights, and some killer heels. And I think what's happening is people are able to express themselves more now. And so I think groups of people are just, I'm going to wear a dress today and we're going to go out, then fine. Whether they would argue that they're drag queens, there's something about a drag queen that has a persona built around them, a backstory, if you like. So most drag performers would argue that it's their business, it's their livelihood. It's a bit like a comic who has a comic persona that they perform, on stage. So, but I think there are more and more people who are using drag as a way to express themselves when they are going out, or whether they're going to like a club, or whether they're going to work. And there's this kind of real interesting shift, I think, around what is acceptable for a man to wear in a workplace, because, you know, what would happen if I turned up one day wearing a skirt? So I think really it's just around trying to, I think, yeah, to answer your question, I think it's more around people using drag to express themselves.
Alistair, you were talking about how RuPaul's kind of laid the foundation of a lot of people being able to express themselves further and looking at the feminine masculine spectrum. Eddie Izzard's been in the news now. Obviously, he's been a transvestite, which is an old term for many years now, and he's always said that he's got boy parts and girl parts. And then recently, Eddie Izzard, let's use the right pronouns, has said that she would prefer to be she, her, but will sometimes feel more masculine and would be he, him in certain circumstances. I wonder whether this environment that's been kind of nurtured and has been publicised, it's becoming more usualised, normalised, whether that's helped people like Eddie Izzard feel that they are able to come out comfortably and say, this is my journey, this is my transition, because that's a very recent thing that she has come out with, whereas she has been saying for many, many years that she is a transvestite, a lesbian in a man's body was a famous thing that she used to say. So I just wonder whether you feel that might be something that's just becoming, easier to do generally, or whether, this whole thing about the drag race, about RuPaul, about it becoming more kind of culturally acceptable has laid the foundation for that.
My answer to that is I couldn't say for definite across the board. In the UK, it's easy for every person, every kid to express themselves in that way. I have a very focused queer circle around me, and what I would class as some of the best LGBT allies that I've ever come across. But then, I don't have access to perhaps other kind of communities or other parts of our society where that gender expression would be heavily frowned upon. If you were, within a family environment where being queer was disgusting and it was as a disgrace, either because of their own beliefs or because of kind of very religious beliefs that say being gay is wrong, then your gender expression and queer expression would be still as stifled as perhaps mine was when I was in that environment when I was 16. So I think it really depends on who you are and what environment you're in. Yes, in some circumstances, high-profile people like Eddie Izzard, the zeitgeist of my generation, yeah, it's great that he's able to now, or she's now able to be the epitome of a queer person, somebody who doesn't let things define them, but also is gender fluid in this context. But I don't think that's unfortunately the case for everybody. And I think that's perhaps why I think events like tonight are important.
Laura, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, it was just a comment really. Thanks, Alistair, because you know how I feel about RuPaul. Anyway, who I think is amazing. But what we've definitely seen is this increase in visibility across popular culture of queer culture, drag culture, and then as a result, we're seeing more of trans culture coming to the community. And I think one of the big episodes for me over the last couple of years was actually seeing RuPaul on the BBC, which was, something I could never have imagined seeing before. Certainly queer culture was something that might have been in the confines of Channel 4 back in the 90s, or sometimes BBC 2, but certainly mainstream BBC 1, seeing, RuPaul and then on the iPlayer has been incredible, and has certainly elevated the culture within older generations as well. So I've seen my dad, who, to be honest, is pretty an open-minded chap, but definitely in his mid-60s, and he's coming, trying to catch up with things, who still goes on about an episode of RuPaul where someone was called Ginger Minge and thinks this is just brilliant and some of the best comedy he's ever seen in his entire life, and has just embraced more and more of queer culture by watching that. And I think certainly some of the popular culture that we're seeing coming out now is so inclusive and really important for allowing, like Alistair said, young people to embrace who they are in a safer environment, because perhaps the people they're talking to have got a heightened awareness now as well. And I think that can only ever be a positive thing to, you know, promote these conversations and again, like events like tonight.
I think, as Alistair said, it's very important though to remember that actually a lot of our patients may come from families that are still not accepting, and so that when patients come to see us, we shouldn't expect that everyone is fully from enlightened environments, but at least we know that through this month and through the training that we have places that we can direct them, and we know that we're going to be as supportive as we can be.
Can I ask a question? So when I'm consulting with someone who may be thinking about changing the gender at which they want to be addressed, talking about their pronouns, and I've recently done a couple of referrals to the Gender Identity Service in Leeds, and there's lots of questions in that pro forma about things like about how people choose to dress. And sometimes it occurs to me that the way that we're talking about dressing as female doesn't align at all with what I consider dressing as female. And so I don't really know what my question is, but just throwing out there that this perception of dressing in a female way to match a gender that one feels they're associating with comes a little bit into conflict with my view of how different genders dress.
I think that falls into the fact that someone can have a gender identity and a gender expression, and they can be different, and that the gender expression is how they want to express themselves. It's not necessarily how they feel that they should. It's how people feel comfortable in expressing their gender expression as well as their own gender identity, and there's a subtle difference in that.
My gender expression normally could almost be considered male in a stereotypical trousers for men and skirts for women way, and I wear less makeup than, well, all of our trans women patients.
What I would say to this, and I think this is a really good comment, and this is something that is ongoing as a debate within drag communities, within gay communities about, and it's one of the biggest criticisms that's levied against drag as an art form, is that what type of hyper feminized woman would constantly wear these types of clothes all the time. And one of the kind of hitbacks to that is to say that a lot of gay men and a lot of men, I think in general in society, are so scared of their femininity that it's repressed. And so whenever something is repressed, it will often then burst out in its hyper form. So drag is an exaggerated version of a femininity that perhaps lots of queer people, and really, you know, put the straightest man you ever know in a pair of fishnets and a 6-inch heel, and they love it like a bitch.
They love it.
So, and I think what I think we're saying is that you when people let down this barrier that they've got to be a certain way, and like you said, Nicole, if you want to wear a hoodie, then you wear a hoodie, love, you know. And I think that's really, it's about expression. And I think drag, you know, again, you know, from reference back to RuPaul, you know, this is an evolving conversation, and I think, you know, everybody's ideas vary and change over time, and RuPaul's ideal of what a drag queen is and what drag is as an art form has evolved massively from early on in the series to now, and that's just, I think, reflecting exactly what you're saying is who defines what ultimate femininity is. You know, that it's really just how you feel your gender expression needs to be.
I think you expressed that better than I could, Al. And I think coming through, and Laura might be similar at the moment, a phase where it's very sort of on trend with children to have gender neutral clothing. And, you know, we've got kids in my son's class at the moment who they've petitioned, and there's a little boy in Annabelle's class who occasionally wears a skirt and a dress to school. And he's got some of Annabelle's old uniforms with unicorns on. And so it's genders, I feel in the children now is a much more fluid thing, and that goes in contrast perhaps with the adult generation that we're seeing as patients. Again, just thoughts. Really,
I'd actually agree there. I think, you know, I think what we've seen, particularly I think in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, I think in young people, is that fluidity of being able to just gender express and change with that as well in you know, kind of from year to year. So I've been working with, for instance, a 12-year-old, and just in the space of 6 months, they've come with long hair to short shaved hair to very manly dress to female, to then actually being able to actually verbalise and express how they're feeling about their sexuality. And that's someone at 12. So I just think, for me, I think that fluidity in how people are wearing their clothes is just a way of being able to gender express, isn't it? And I do think it is a lot more allowable in young people today than what it was even just 5 years ago.
Probably same for you, Sarah. I'm coming across more younger people, teenagers who would describe themselves as non-binary.
I think Claire hit the nail on the head. She said she hasn't seen so many young people come through the door with so many gender issues in the last 3 years. But actually, is it just because we're allowing them to be able to freely be able to express and they feel safe to express? I don't think it's that they've not been there. I think it's just that we've not been allowing or giving the opportunity for people to feel that they can express. So I totally agree. I think there's a lot more allowance out there now, but there's also the allowance to actually not have to choose. So if somebody wants to be, you know, non-binary in year 8, that doesn't necessarily mean they are in year 11, you know. So and they choose whatever path they want to choose at that time in whatever way they want to feel they express it, really.
It makes me wonder if it must be even harder for a trans woman who actually, their version of woman might be more hoodie and jeans, and that must be even harder because do those individuals feel, as Al said, that they almost have to over-express what is seen by society as feminine, but actually their own inner feeling of being feminine may not be so extreme.
Listening to how we are talking about it and the use of the word allowed, and just what Nicole's just said about, well, what if they want to wear hoodie and what have you? It still comes back to what the society in the whole considers to be acceptable and allowable, and that to me is what we need to dispel, because people should be able to just be.
Thank you ever so much for talking to us about RuPaul, Alistair. As Moudy is captive in Westcliff surgery, should we go to you next?
My LGBT plus hero is Alan Turing, that I'd like to talk through with you all. So I just wanted to start off with a simple question to make you think for a second. What is a hero? Do they have to be a cape-wearing, underwear on the outside person who flies around and saves people? Or is it really the magnitude of what they do or have done in the past that is important? If you can all just think about, what do Captain Satomore and your everyday computer have in common? In short, it's Alan Turing, so my choice for an LGBT plus hero, and mainly around his involvement in the Second World War. He was a British mathematician. His parents lived in India due to his dad's work in the British Civil Service. And Alan Turing and his brother went to boarding school here in Britain, and he was a bit of a loner. And he struggled to make friends, and unfortunately his best friend, and some would say his only friend, Christopher, died of tuberculosis in his teens. And this kind of really changed Alan from what we can read about him, and he really dedicated himself and his life to scientific discoveries. Fast forward quite a few years, and in 1936, Alan Turing created the idea of a special machine, and it's a machine that could be given a set of instructions that could give an output accordingly. And now we call them computers, but back then the idea was known as a universal Turing machine, and it's the principle on which the modern day computer was developed. And during the war, communicating amongst armies was very important to get messages, plans, attacks and strategies arranged. And the Nazis were able to use a machine called Enigma to encrypt their messages and keep them secret from the Allies. And this gave them a massive advantage to which they capitalized and used to invade and conquer the majority of Europe. The Enigma code was crippling the Allies, and soon the Nazis would have taken over all of Europe, and the war would have been over, with fascism being the new normal. So you can see why we really needed to break this code. So the hero Alan was approached by the UK government, and knowing that we're not doing well in this war, they enlisted his help to break the code. Alan was brought to a secret facility where he rapidly developed the first ever computer, which broke the Enigma code and eventually ended the war. Having the ability to break the Enigma code meant the Allies were able to spoil the Nazi attacks and consequently break them down. And on conservative estimates, suggest Alan Turing's input to break the Enigma code meant the war ended about 2 to 3 years sooner than it would have done otherwise. And with estimates of 7 million deaths per year spared, you're looking at about 21 million people's lives saved. And if you ask me, in my opinion, that's the definition of a true hero. Unfortunately, our hero doesn't have a nice ending. So Alan, he was given an OBE in 1946 for his wartime work, but surely more would be befitting of a person who was so instrumental to the Allies winning the war against fascism, a hero's parade, a national bank holiday, and he didn't get any of that. In 1952, was caught in an illegal activity, a crime so bad he had his security clearance revoked with the intelligence agencies that he helped so much, and he was no longer allowed to work due to his criminal status. So what was his crime? His crime was that he loved someone. He wanted to settle down with someone, have a relationship, create a home, a family, a life, as simple as that. And unfortunately, the world was a different place at that time, where homosexual activity was illegal and would continue to be illegal until 1967. And he was given the choice of prison or chemical castration, and he chose the latter, so that at least he could continue on his life work of developing the computer. 2 years later, in 1954, Alan Turing was found dead after committing suicide by cyanide poisoning. How do you transition from such a sad ending to a man's life who all of us, in one way or another, are so indebted to a more upbeat ending? I'd like to briefly go back to Captain Tom, a man who captured all our hearts as we struggled with the various pressures of the pandemic over the last year, a man who made us see good when it was so difficult, and a man who was able to do so as a result of this man's brilliance, Alan Turing. Captain Tom lived to just over 100 years old. He had a wife, children, grandchildren, and enjoyed all the beauties of life until the very end, and was able to bring some of that joy to the rest of us. And I can only imagine what Alan Turing might have been able to contribute to the world had he been given the same chance to live beyond 42 years old. I just hope now we live in a world that would give opportunity to the next Alan Turing to really show us what they've got to offer, rather than stifle and put, never mind one, but both hand and limbs behind their backs and ask them to swim. Quoting the phrase of the month, love is love, and people with people, this guy could have done even more amazing things, and he wasn't given that opportunity to do so.
Thank you ever so much, Moudy. That was a really good presentation. And I think you're right. You know, he's one of the people that could have done so much more if he'd been allowed to.
I just wanted to say I was really chuffed that you chose Alan Turing. I think he's an amazing man. I totally agree with you, Moudy. He should have recognition for the things that he did in the war. I also think that the chemical castration was just unbelievably barbaric, and it's shocking that those things still go on in some parts of the world. Just think it's absolutely horrific.
Thanks, Jude. I totally agree. I'm sure Alistair and everyone else on this part, you yourself included, have probably got loads that you could say about the people that we've chosen. And the amazing thing is just what an impact these people have had in modern day life. And you think that particular quote from his about, if Turing believes machines think, and then Turing lies with men, therefore machines don't think. And that's just amazing, and how eloquently he's put it, that in essence, machines think, everyone else thinks machines think, but he's gay, so therefore no, he must be wrong. And it's like this man saved millions of lives, ended a war, and we couldn't even give him enough respect, the dignity to be able to just live his life and carry on what he's doing.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on your last kind of couple of lines, Moudy, about I hope that we now live in a world where, like, the next Alan Turing lives. And I think genuinely in this country, we are so further forwards than where we were. But I don't think we live in a whole world that's anywhere close to saving the next Alan Turing. I still think there's such a large pockets of the world where it's still criminal to be gay, to be homosexual, prisonable by death, prisonable by imprisonment. You know, it's such an, I was just looking today, caught up in the holiday vibe of let's book a holiday. And it reminds me back to when we could book holidays, where I might think of a place I want to visit in the world, and then I have to go on the Home Office website, and then I have to see, is it safe for LGBT travellers to visit that country? And that means that we're still in a world where the next Alan Turing could suffer exactly the same fate that Alan Turing suffered. So I think we are moving forwards in this country in massive leaps in so many ways, but unfortunately, I don't think that's the same across the world.
I say we don't even need to go across the world. There's pockets in this country that are just as bad, and there's people in this country that are just as bad. And I suppose it's places like this, as in this call right now, that are going to make those changes. And it's a slow turning ship, isn't it? It's not a handbrake turn, and all of these things we're going to change overnight. It's having these conversations daily, and sometimes it's frustrating and it is tiring, but it comes back to each and every one of us to be able to have these conversations and look prejudice dead in the eye and be like, no, you've got no place here. Whatever that prejudice and discrimination is, it's got no place. And it's remarkable just how quickly when one person stands up, the cowardice of those of prejudice and how quickly they back down against it, and the quick change that can be made across people who just listen and those people that take the time and effort to speak to them.
Unfortunately, it can work the other way as well, can't it? That you can have some reasonable people and then a crowd around them of unreasonable voices, and suddenly they go with the crowd. And out of interest, one of Rick's posts for the month was actually about how Alan Turing has done something more recently and has been helpful to actually many other gay men, because I'm sure Rick could tell the story, but wasn't it that he was pardoned because of his pardoning and because of the celebrity of that case? Actually, many gay men went on to be pardoned. But I'm sure, Rick, if you don't mind just explaining that a little bit, because you'll be more clued up than me.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Moudy. That was a really touching presentation. One thing that I was just going to say before I move on to what Kathy has asked is this idea. I don't know if within your reading you came across the possibility or the argument that he didn't commit suicide and that his death was accidental. And it's kind of like it's a classic tragedy of the case that he was so distraught and depressed by the fact that he was made to inject female hormones and chemically castrate himself, that he couldn't take any more and that he had to end it all and he committed suicide. But if you read about the case, there's lots of evidence to say that he was actually doing all right, and there was no suggestion that he was depressed. It was possibly an accident. And I think it's just a very interesting twist on the story, isn't it? And there isn't any evidence to kind of support either argument, but I just wonder what your opinion was about that.
I read that, and then I read one article about it, and it just it just smells like cover up. So it's the one that I read was for a statement from his mum, who actually said it, and it just smelled exactly like she was, for use of a better word, ashamed, basically, that she couldn't see beyond the fact that he was gay.
Yeah.
The man did something incredible. His own mum couldn't see beyond the fact that he was gay. Yeah. And she was willing to distance herself from him and not blame those who are really to blame, the authorities, the police officers who continue to harass him, were there every single day at his house, giving him grief and throwing bricks through his windows. She didn't blame any of them, and she distanced herself from all of that and blamed the son.
It's just a very interesting, when I was researching about the case, I actually wasn't aware that there was this other side to the argument at all, but I agree. So yeah, in 2017, the UK government passed what's known as the Turing Law, which allows men with previous convictions, criminal convictions based on consensual sexual activity, to be cleared. Now, I mean, that's all well and good, but the process is still that individual has to apply to have that conviction cleared. It's not an automatic clearance. And since the law came to pass in 2017, I think only like 150 odd men have had convictions cleared. So I think, yes, it's a step in the right direction, but I think there's an argument against why isn't this an automatic clearance? Why does there have to be this sort of administrative process involved in that?
Actually, Rick, if you think about it, when we have to do so much clearance now for people to take up positions, that could actually jeopardise somebody's career.
Yes, of course it could, yeah.
Probably has done, let's say it could.
Yeah, well, yeah, historically it has done, yeah. You know, I think without a shadow of a doubt, Lorraine, it stopped men from applying for specific jobs, professions, and volunteering roles because of the conviction. Yeah.
Thank you ever so much, Moody. That was a really moving presentation about Alan. Next, we've got Jude.
So I wanted to share with you a story about a bloke that worked in the same office as me back in the mid-90s. I used to work for Yorkshire Water back then, and it was a big open plan office, and I don't by any stretch claim to know this man well at all, just you know, in passing to get a cup of coffee. It was called John, well, he still is called John Beckett. He joined the Navy in 1989, and he was an engineer servicing weapons for the Navy. He was having a few personal problems in 93, so he'd been in the Navy for quite some time then. They'd recognised his leadership skills. They'd said that he was on the path to potential promotion to be commissioned as an officer. In 93, he was having some personal problems and asked for some leave of absence, and that was declined. So because he was struggling, he went and talked to the chaplain and explained that he was in a same-sex relationship and that he was struggling with this and with the fact that he'd signed up to the Navy for 22 years and he wasn't allowed to express himself. The chaplain then promptly went and told his commanding officer, and he was dismissed. The service police came and searched his premises. They removed personal items such as photographs and letters between him and his partner, and he went through a really horrific time. He appealed to the Admiralty Board, and at the end of 94, so about 18 months on, the Admiralty Board threw that out and totally disregarded it. He and 3 other ex-service personnel, so another guy from the Navy called Lustig Preen, and a nurse from the RAF and an officer from the RAF, took the MOD to the Court of Appeal to appeal against their dismissals, and the Court of Appeal threw it out. They then carried on with their fight until eventually in 2000, the European Human Rights Commission found in their favour, part of their finding was that the MOD had acted in an illegal manner. And so in 2000, the MOD had to change their policies and change their rules such that they could no longer sack people for their sexuality. And I just so admire this man for his guts in standing up to the government, to the general public, and fighting for his rights and fighting for the rights of so many other people. I just find it astounding that he had it in him to make such a stand. And he was such a lovely, quietly spoken bloke. He was just really nice guy. To think that he'd gone through all of that and what a massive impact his actions have then had. So just last month, there was a ruling that people who had been sacked from the forces and had had their medals removed and had lost their rights to their pensions, are now able to get those medals back. They haven't had the benefit of the pay that they should have been entitled to, the benefit of the pensions that they should have had. And this is still a fight that an awful lot of ex-servicemen are fighting. So I just wanted to share that with you. I think he's incredible for having the guts to cope with what was going on in his own personal life, and then to go through all of this and to keep on being resilient for 7 years to get an outcome.
Thank you very much, Jude. That was a very good story that probably not many of us would know of on a personal level. We may have heard of cases, but it was interesting that you've experienced that with someone that you knew. And it does go back to Moudy's picture of what's a hero. And if you're fighting for a country who does not support your lifestyle choices, but to keep fighting for them anyway is a remarkable thing to do.
I'm very grateful that you shared that story, Jude, because it's people from my community, like your colleague, who paved the way for me to be able to be the person who I am now, to be able to have less prejudice in the workplace. Okay, I was never going to go in the army because I just don't think I've got the physique for that. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that, when I first came out to my mum when I was 22, it was a disaster, but that's a different tale. But the main thing is that the catalogue of tales that the references that she had were exactly what you're describing. So her reference point of gayness was disaster, failure, no career. You might be in prison, you may be dead, you're going to die of AIDS, which obviously, in the 90s and the late 80s was a big topic. So I'm just really grateful for the people like the person you've talked about today, who just paved the way for me to be able to be kind of where I am and who I am. So I'm very grateful.
Absolutely. And researching this, I hadn't realised, but the last person that was court-martialed and imprisoned for being gay was that happened in 93. So that was the same year that John was sacked. So for him to make that stand and face it, he could have been sent to prison because that was what was going on then, I think is even more amazing and strong of him to have done.
And can I just finish as well by saying that this fight happened back in 2000 in the UK. I think, the year 2000 feels like quite a long time ago, so it feels like kind of recent history in some ways. But I think what feels much more present is the fact that this exact same issue was only repealed in 2011 in the United States. So it was just 10 years ago that in the United States you could be expelled from any of the armed forces if you were gay, and their policy of don't ask, don't tell was only repealed in 2011. And that to me, I think is just showed how much kind of still much of a fight that there probably still is somewhere.
And I'm quite sure that I don't know, but there will be plenty of countries in the world where that's still the case, where that still happens. So another person I was researching as a possible person to bring forward as a hero was Gareth Thomas. And he's making a stand at the moment against the football community and saying, the football community have agreed to World Cups in Russia and Qatar where it's not acceptable to be gay. And yet they're saying that, we're doing everything we can and it's not a sports issue, and really putting their head in the sand and not coming forward and doing anything to support the LGBT community is the way that it seems.
There's also something reflecting back on America, saying that they've only just passed the Equality Act for LGBT plus people this last week, and every single Republican bar 3 voted against it. And that's absolutely abhorrent that happened last week, and yet every Republican bar 3 people voted against having equality for LGBT plus people in America a week ago. It's ridiculous.
Very much linked to that and Jude's overall presentation, that you don't even need to go that far, Alistair. Just 3 years ago, the last administration in America banned transgender people from joining the army. And it's amazing to think that in my presentation, Alistair said, okay, we're starting to live in a country that's starting to turn the page and actually moving forward, and maybe in the world that isn't the case. And instantly when he said that, my thought process went to more of, let's say, a third world place in the world where actually maybe they're not as developed and maybe they don't share our values. Across the pond, we're talking about the country that we have a special relationship with. They're able to overnight change their rules and discriminate against an entire populace from doing what they want to do. It's just incredible as the countries that are supposed to be the leading light in this world of freedom of speech, freedom of democracy, freedom of doing whatever the hell you want, actually behind those initial open doors have possibly the most closed of all.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Moody. You know, the more you scratch the surface, the more shocking it is that what you find out, isn't it?
Rick, we're coming to you now.
Thanks, everybody. I think it's fantastic that this is it's just generating so much discussion, isn't it? I think that's really excellent to see. I had a good think about who I would consider one of my LGBT heroes, and I mean, there are so many people out there who have been pioneers for LGBT plus people, and a lot of people who have inspired me. But tonight I've chosen to talk about a very personal hero who is an ex-partner of mine, and who was the first person with whom I was ever in a relationship with. So his name is Paul, and we met when I was 19, and I was at university at the time, and we'd met in Halifax while I was home over the summer. And at this stage, I was only just coming to terms with my sexuality. I wasn't out at the age of 19. And about 12 months prior to that, I'd had a breakup with a female partner. And I was just a bit unsure about things in general. I kind of knew that I was gay, but I just wasn't at that stage where I was really comfortable with things. And so Paul was a bit older than I was, and different set of circumstances. He had his own house, he was in regular full-time employment, and I was backwards and forwards to university in Newcastle. And Paul was obviously a gay man, but he was out to his friends and his sister, but he wasn't out to his parents. And we had, in gay terms, I suppose, a relatively long relationship, which we were together for 5 years at the time. And admittedly, it might seem a little strange to have an ex-partner as an LGBT plus hero, but I do consider him one of my personal heroes. And the reason why is that I feel that he helped me with my own identity as a gay man at the time when I was quite unsure about things. He introduced me to lots of aspects of gay culture, from pop music, gay musical icons, iconic gay films and TV series, literature, and also, quite importantly, to a new sort of social life, gay bars, the gay scene, when we went on holiday, for example. I remember meeting his circle of straight friends who were very accepting of gay people and who made me feel very comfortable around others and being able to express myself freely. And I was also part of his circle of gay friends, gay and lesbian friends, and that allowed me to gain insight into other people's experiences and their own history about being gay, coming out at a time when I was struggling to do this. It helped me, Paul just helped me with my understanding of, my own feelings and personal circumstances and things that I was going through in my own life. Quite an inspiration. And he was my first ever experience of gay life in the noughties. And I think that kind of molded me and changed me and developed me into the person I am today, really. I remember the first time I went to a gay bar and how I felt so comfortable being in that space, realizing that this was a safe space and what that meant for other people who were also in that situation. He just offered me a lot of inspiration to be my own true person, expressing myself quite freely, without the judgment that I'd maybe had from my family or my friends. And he kind of made me forget about everybody else's preconceived ideas about what was normal, what was right and wrong, and not feeling worried about what other people think, and just being able to be your original true self at that stage of my life was really important. Just going out for a romantic meal in a restaurant, or walking into a bar together, going on holiday, just doing completely normal things in a heteronormative society, and not even giving it a second thought. And just I felt a real sort of sense of pride at that stage in my life to be a gay man. And yeah, I like I say, I think it's maybe a little bit odd to have an ex-partner as an LGBT hero. And even though our time had to come to an end, I still stand by my decision to sort of choose him as a hero. And I'm quite thankful for the time we spent together and the inspiration that he gave me at that time. So I hope that wasn't too soppy or personal.
No, thank you ever so much. It was personal, but I think the fact is that we are a product of our experiences on the personal level as well as, you know, societal levels. And I think unless you have someone in your life that guides you in a certain way, sometimes you can feel lost. So thank you for being open about that.
Thanks, Rick. That was incredibly personal and a really lovely story. And I think it's totally appropriate to have your ex-partner as your hero, because clearly this is a huge moment in your life. So thank you for sharing that with us, because, yeah, it was incredibly personal, but lovely to hear.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks. I suppose it's very hard, isn't it, when you're straight and you've grown up in a heteronormative society, you just don't have any of these concerns about how you're going to be perceived, or the right or the wrong way to act in certain circumstances, social situations. And sometimes that can be very difficult, very stifling to a person's, personal growth, I think, sometimes, especially when they're younger. I think, did I say that comment before about growing up in a heteronormative society? A gay person or a trans person would stifle particular qualities about themselves just to fit in, and that can be very restrictive, very harmful. I think not having that freedom to be able to express yourself is unbelievably powerful, I think.
Whilst I was listening to you, Rick, I was reflecting on just something that you actually said. I've never had to think about anything like that. Never had to cross my mind about how people are going to perceive me because of the way I choose to live my life. It was never anything. I'm 3-year-old. I've never think that way, and I feel incredibly sad when I hear that my daughter had with one of her friends who's gay, and she asked him when he had come out, and he said he's never come out. Why should he come out? In his view, he is who he is. He took his boyfriend home to meet his parents, just as I would have done taking my boyfriend home. For him, he doesn't want that. He didn't want, and that's how he lives his life. And that's what saddens me, that people aren't able to do, or feel able to do that. They don't feel like you've been inspired and you're a hero. And I think it's phenomenal that you have had that hero in your life, that he allowed, it's that allowed word again, but you felt able from his experience and how he was supporting you to be able to do that. But you should have been able to do it, shouldn't you?
Yeah, you should, but that's the whole idea of this concept of the heteronormative society, how you can't. And I mean, I almost maybe a little bit of envy about people who are in that situation where they are either they just don't give two hoots about what people think about them, or they have no qualms about upsetting somebody, or they just have been raised in an environment that is so inclusive that they are able to, and they're in that position to say, okay, well, I'm going to just take my boyfriend home to meet your mum and dad. That's fine. I was never in that position. I mean, things were a little bit different, obviously, in my circumstances, but it's a combination of factors that allows that to happen. It's not just one thing. But yeah, I mean, even just going on holiday together and walking into a hotel and thinking, shit, we've ordered a double bed, what are they going to say? And being asked if you want 2 single beds and thinking, it's just the smallest little thing happens, and you've just got to suck it up and get on with it. And unless you, feel so confident, you can just actually say, well, no, fuck it, I'm having the king size. But yeah, I think.
Something I've always wondered about the term coming out, and I never really knew whether it was, didn't know so much about the gay culture, and I didn't know whether it was an optional thing or something that was used in gay culture. And sort of listening to it, I think it's really sad that people should have to hide who they are. I share that sadness that Lorraine has mentioned, that, you know, people are frightened of showing what they feel and how they want to live. I just do think it's really sad that, you know, like Rick, you've shared your experience, and obviously your hero sort of facilitated you coming out and being more comfortable with what you felt, what you were, what you wanted to be, how you wanted to live. And I just think in our society, no one should ever have to be frightened of what they are or what they feel. It's about time, really.
Yeah. Well, I think the sad fact is, Maryam, and I completely agree with what you're saying, but when you are faced with the possibility of violence or even death, at the prospect, you know, with you, you know, divulging or, you know, expressing who you really are and who you are as a person, then there's only one option. You keep that hidden, you don't talk about it, you not able to express yourself freely. And that still happens to this very day. People are, you know, violence against LGBT plus people is rife across the world.
Can I just say, I do love Maryam's idea of branding coming out and it becoming a celebration, like a quinceanera, because like my coming out was one of the most stressful things ever to like people. Like you would like not sleep for days. You'd have to drink like a bottle of gin before you did it. Well, it wasn't gin back then, it was Jack Daniels. And it was really, really stressful. So I love the idea of rebranding this coming out and it being a celebration almost, rather than it being like this massive stress. So I think we should work on that. I feel like that's within our power to do.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Lorraine said, really, how much you take for granted, you know, like a heteronormative society. It's like a privilege not having to think about certain things like Rick's mentioned. But my question to Rick is, these worries that you have about kind of booking a holiday or booking a restaurant or doing this or that activity when you're outside the home, is that something that gets easier with time, or every time you do it, is it kind of, does it affect you?
No, I think now, having had a lot of experience and just coming to terms, you know, and I think society is changing. You know, it's not like it happens every single time. I'm not afraid to leave the house. But
I didn't mean that.
No, I'm joking. But no, it doesn't happen every time. But certainly the freedoms that straight people have in being able to just, you know, put a peck on the cheek or grab someone's hand or just, you know, certain small public displays of affection, which I'm not a huge fan of anyway, but just that freedom you just don't have, because you don't know who's watching, what's going to happen. Somebody might shout some abusive language at you, or I don't know, you know, it depends. So you kind of got to have your wits about you, I think, and just be mindful of the fact that there are people out there who are just completely discriminatory against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people. So but it's not happening. You know, it's not like it's a constant thing. It's just having that. But again, that shouldn't happen, should it? I shouldn't have to walk around having my wits about me.
So this month I've sat in on a few of these talks. One of my friends has been doing some Twitter feeds and interviewing several different people this month. And at one point he interviewed a mutual friend of ours, and she was talking about when marriage was legalised, when it was recognised for gay people, and how although everyone celebrated it, it was really strange celebrating something that actually is something that the majority of people take for granted. And it was something that just really hit home to me this month, that it just got me thinking about everything, I guess. And it was just the comment she made of they didn't rush out to get married because she kind of thought, well, I should have been able to do this when I wanted to, not when it suddenly the rest of the country caught up and it was allowed.
I've two things. Coming back to this feeling of just being able to be you and being your true self. When you listen to the story of Alan Turing and his own mother, you know, and I'm sure there's other people experience that when their own families have not supported them, that isn't it. It has to be incredibly hard then to be you and to be comfortable being you, because you don't want to hurt the family, do you? Has that happened to like you, Alistair or Rick? Did that happen, that you were concerned about your families?
Yeah, I mean, my mum is also another potential for an LGBT plus hero because of of how she is and how she's always been, in terms of being just so open-minded and forward-thinking and accepting. But I was petrified. Yeah, I was like, I cannot do this to my mum. I can't cause this amount of grief. She was, clearly she had other worries, that were based on, society's opinion about gay people and how they were dangerous and things. And that was a possible worry for her. But I didn't, I was so worried about upsetting her. And I had this whole toing and froing backwards and forwards, like Alistair mentioned, like sleepless nights and just trying to pluck up the courage to be able to do this in such a sensitive way that I wasn't going to cause offence. And then the kind of epiphany moment came when I was round at my sister's house and my partner at the time called my mobile and I put the phone down and Josh went, "So was that him then?" My sister said, "Was that him then?" I said, yeah. And so we started talking about it. And then she just kind of told me that mum was already aware of the fact that I was gay, and she was just waiting for me to tell her and just kind of put her mind at rest, and she was already accepted it. So all that worry and that strife just was basically, worry for nothing.
I think everybody's journey is different. My parents were extremely Christian. That was their belief, that was their religion, and we ate, breathed and soaked in church and the Bible like 7 days a week. We'd go to church activities all weekend. It would be throughout the week as well. So I'd grown up with the idea that being gay was something to be ashamed of and would only lead to failure in the eyes of God. So for me to come out to them, the stakes were high because I was very much felt that I was going to be on the street. And although other members of my family did know I was gay and were extremely accepting of it, there's nothing quite like the disappointment that parents can display to children to really shatter any sense of, kind of inner being that you might have. So for me, it came to the point, it was tearing me up between lying to them, which I never liked doing because, I had a very close relationship with my parents, versus telling them the truth and possibly meaning that I never had a relationship with them again in the future. So there was a large part of my early 20s where I was straddling that every time I'd see them, to the point where it would often just turn into, we'd find something to argue about. So the experience was cut short very quickly. And I think everybody's perspective changes in life. And unfortunately, my mum passed away about 5 years ago. And to this day, really, she only kind of started to accept my gayness and be able to say the word gay out loud without kind of the heavens opening and all the windows shattering, was kind of within the last couple of weeks of life, really. And it was only to that point where perhaps she started to reflect on kind of her faith, her religion, what that has meant and where those twists and turns had left her, that she really truly started to accept it. So I think what I would say to you, Lorraine, is there's a big move now. There's a big kind of thing in the LGBT community where people talk a lot about this concept of gay shame. So there are a lot of kind of autobiographies of celebrities, gay celebrities, LGBT plus celebrities that have grown up gay, and this concept of gay shame. There's a great book by Matthew Todd, who was one of the editors of Attitude magazine for many years in the UK, which explores this idea about gay shame that LGBTQ youths grow up with and the impact that has on their confidence and their psyche and their ability to form proper relationships, because you're living in sometimes straddling two worlds. So I think it's something that perhaps gay men of Rick and I's and LGBT plus people of Rick and I's generation maybe had to grapple with it more. And my hope moving forwards, as we've talked about from the start tonight, is that hopefully that's going to become less of an issue moving forwards. But I think there are unfortunately everybody's, well, yeah, like I said, everybody's journey is slightly different.
I just wanted to say thanks to Rick and to Alistair for sharing that. As I said earlier, one of the other people I've been researching as a possible hero was Gareth Thomas, and I watched his documentary about coming out earlier today. And in that, he goes to see his niece at school, who's in her teens. But before he came out, she was bullied relentlessly by people at school because rumours were going around that he was gay, and the impact that that had on the rest of his family. And when he did come out, what a colossal relief it was to her. My youngest cousin's gay, and the rest of the family were aware of it, but it was never talked about for about 15 years before he finally had the guts to come out to his parents. And the rest of us were so accepting of it because we'd known for such a long time, but his mum and dad just couldn't see it. And family life has been so much more relaxed now that suddenly all of this is out in the open than it ever was before. And that obviously had been the case in the Thomas household as well, and in so many other households across the world, I'm sure.
But it is interesting that the use that you had of the phrase, it took years for him to get the guts to tell us, almost as if the onus is on him. I know that's not what I meant, but it's interesting, isn't it, that we put the onus on the person to kind of have to deal with this immense thing of this heteronormative, cisnormative society. But it's the person who doesn't fit in with what we think of as normal and usual should get on and tell us that. Do you know what I mean?
I absolutely agree with you, Kathy.
I think your tweets and Kathy's stuff that she's done this month really was more helpful than you might think. So I tried to make a point of making sure I liked and retweeted everything that you guys did, both for the fact that I enjoyed it and agreed with it, but also so that people who follow me who don't necessarily follow you get to see it. And it was interesting that people who I know messaged me as well, and kind of along the lines of, oh, what's with all of this? And I said, well, do you know that it's actually LGBT History Month? And did you know that we've got this panel going at work? And did you know that actually prejudice is prejudice and it doesn't really matter? And actually, what I was referring to earlier was along those lines, that once you have these conversations and you push back against that norm, because I can't remember who said it, but it's very easy for the good amongst us to get sucked into some of the negative ways of thinking. It just starts with that, oh, what's with all of this? And then you put up the barriers and, oh, it's just something silly at work or whatever else. But actually pushing back and saying, no, actually, we're trying to be more inclusive and be more open for these discussions as an organisation, was met with really positive things. And two of them, who are pharmacists and really influential in their practices, took it away to have conversations within their practices.
Thanks, Moody. I really appreciate those comments. And yeah, maybe I didn't see the potential wider impact from people tweeting and retweeting. And I really appreciate you spreading the word. I think that, obviously clearly very helpful for some people.
Well, it's interesting that since we've done the Rainbow training, the Rainbow Badge training, that actually BCA and Modality and one other group have come and said that they'd be interested in us doing that for their group so they can get the NHS badge as well.
Rick opened my eyes to, well, the whole kind of group with this kind of project has opened my eyes to things I hadn't thought about before. And it's just something I always thought coming out was some big kind of event that you worked up to over months and months and you came out to your family and that was it and you were out. But on discussion, it's not really, is it? Because every time you move into a new social group or you move into a new kind of workplace or social situation, you, as a gay person, I assume you always have that concern or worry about coming out again. And it's I don't know, it's just something I'd never really thought about, and just a symptom of a heteronormative society, really.
Yeah, I mean, you start a new job, you've got to decide, how much information you divulge, how authentic you're going to portray yourself, how much information you're going to talk to other people, give to other people about your private and personal life. Circles of friends kind of merge, and sometimes it's not always as difficult as you might think. But until we change society as a whole, it's something which anybody who is an outsider, anybody who is a minority, is going to experience, I think.
I think some of the hardest occasions are the small ones, like going to buy some flowers and a bottle of wine on their way home, and people making an assumption.
Rick, you put a very good quote on the chat. Do you mind reading it out for us?
Yeah, I mentioned this before, we've alluded to this within this sort of chat forum tonight, but queer people don't grow up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimise humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick which parts of ourselves are truly us and which parts we've created to protect us.
Thank you very much. Please,
can we keep this conversation going? I've gained so much, and I just feel that we're all going to be a lot richer in ourselves for this. So can we keep it going?
Yeah, definitely.
Not just once a year.
I want to thank everyone on our panel. I'd like to thank Alistair, Moudy, Jude and Rick. I hope everyone found it as interesting as I did. I found this conversation it's a start, isn't it? It's a start to move forward and to increase that awareness, as you say, Matt. The things you're not aware of it, but this is affecting people every single day. Certainly the stories of the different heroes have inspired me. I never thought of RuPaul like that. I hadn't really thought about Alan Turing that much. To know personal stories from Rick's first love and someone who Jude worked with, John Beckett. These are all heroes that certainly don't wear capes. If anyone wants to find out any more history, obviously you can just Google LGBT plus figures. There is a website linked with LGBT plus History Month called www.voicesinvisibility.org.uk, and there's a lot of information there about the history of LGBTs, dates, personalities, themes, looking at like the flags and the symbols as well. So I definitely recommend that. I want to thank everyone for coming and for taking part, and I want to thank everyone for their honesty today. So thank you ever so much.